Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. My name is Christina Previtt. I am one of two lead faculty for the modern management of the older adult curricula. It is Wednesday, which means that it is hump day, hustling, email day. So if you have not yet subscribed, it is a kind of collection of different research pieces that all the faculty across all the divisions have kind of put together, and it comes into your inbox every Wednesday. And that is where we have some of our live courses and next online courses that are all announced there. So if you're looking to keep up to date with some of the stuff that's going on in the ICE world, I encourage you to sign up for that email. We also have a tribute workout coming down the pipeline tomorrow. If you have been following the MMOA crew, you know that we have talked about Ernie. His grandson Devin used to run an Instagram account for him called 99 Years Young. Unfortunately, Ernie passed away earlier this year, and so we're going to be doing a memorial workout to just thank him for all of his positive influence in the aging space, and to give him the attention and love that he deserves over his very long and very fulfilling life. So if you guys are interested, we have some of the Zoom links for that memorial workout that's going to happen Thursday night. So let us know if you can make it, and we would love to have a group of people on there working out for Ernie with some of his favorite workouts. All right, so today I'm going to talk a little bit more, less about the research and more about just a construct that I've been thinking about a lot lately around how sometimes getting older can be synonymous with being powerless. And let me kind of go through a couple of stories to kind of illustrate what I mean, and then we're going to talk about what we as PTs can do about it. So two kind of stories that come up in my caseload over the last week, which just shows you how often this is probably happening. One, I was talking to a client of mine, and so in the Canadian context, because some of our long-term care facilities, most of them are publicly funded or at least subsidized, there is quite a long waiting list sometimes to get on to these long-term care facilities. So our kind of ranking or spectrum of more assisted living is an independent living facility, a retirement home, more like a skilled nursing facility, and an into long-term care when you need the highest amount of care. And depending on where you live, it can be upwards of 3 to 5 years for an older adult to find a spot, because there's a bunch of emergency spots, et cetera, et cetera. There's just a lot that goes on there, but that's not the point. The point is that sometimes we have to make the decision, where do you think I'm going to be in 3 years? And do you think I'm going to need so much support that I need to be into a long-term care facility? And most of the time, if not 100% of the time, it is more the family members of the loved one, which makes sense. This is not a bad thing about that are making the decision to put some of their loved ones on these lists instead of the decision happening with a loved one themselves. And so I had a client who was in her late 60s, and she was having a meeting with a person from a long-term care facility with her mom, who was in her late 80s, around, should we start thinking about putting my mom on this list? And she was talking about how fatiguing and taxing it was for her mom, who was starting to have a little bit of loss of cognitive reserve, but understood that this was a really important meeting around this transition in care that she may not have actually wanted, but may have needed, and would she have met the eligibility criteria of the facility that she's living in now. And it made me kind of sad to think about those types of conversations around trying to estimate or create progression or kind of map out your decline and your need to remove more and more of your independence and rely more and more on other people. And so that was number one. And then number two is I was talking to another one of my clients. She's in her mid-70s, and she has been living with Parkinson's disease for some time, doing very, very well. And she was talking about how she wanted to do certain things. So she wanted to go back into the choir, and she wanted to start taking exercise classes for individuals with Parkinson's. And I was saying to her, I was like, well, why aren't you doing these things? Like, you're independent, you're doing all these things on their own. And the reason why she wasn't is because her daughter told her that she couldn't. And I said, like, this is kind of still your decision. You're living independently. Like, she can have a conversation with you and voice some of her concerns, but you ultimately are the one who is the decision maker. And she kind of said to me that she just didn't want to deal with the battle, and that it's kind of a constant fight around what she is allowed to do and what she isn't. And, both of these stories that came up in the last week are really eye-opening to me with some of the conversations that I've had with my own family about my grandmother, who is 96. She lives on her own, and she does not want to use a gait aid. And she is very openly talked about that she recognizes that there is risks to falling as she gets older and is more unstable, but she would rather try and slow down a little bit and not have to use a cane or a walker than decide to use one. And I think that, she is showing insight. She is showing that she is an adult, that she can make decisions, and that she is going to choose the option that is best for her. And it just seems like we have this threshold. And for some medical things, it's 65, where I posted about falls prevention, where we were talking about, when you're 64, we're not going to talk about that. But did you know that 1 in 3 persons over the age of 65 fall every year? I would love to see the statistics on 30 to 35, because I'm pretty sure 1 in 3 of us fall each year, and we don't create these issues around it. And what do we think about some of these thresholds as we get older? And we do that in a way to try and be helpful, right? Like, family members are trying to keep their parents safe, their loved ones safe. As clinicians, we are trying to help. We are trying to create these communication strategies that allow us to keep our older adults injury-free. But at the same time, we have to balance that out with the fact that we are gradually taking power away from our clients. When we are in medical or healthcare interactions with our older adults, oftentimes they can feel powerless. Some of that is the generational constructs around medical providers and the patient. That's something that I think is slowly starting to change as we start to create more therapeutic alliance, and we try to really come down to our clients' levels and ask them. But some of it is also because of this construct of gradually taking power and autonomy and independence away from our older adults as they get to a certain age. And it's interesting because it's like, as we get older, making really dumb decisions is no longer allowed. I am 31. I have made plenty of dumb decisions about life, about relationships, about, going physically, doing things that I probably shouldn't. And I have never had that taken away from me, or saying that I should be questioning my cognition because I'm not making the right decisions, or based on somebody else's perception of what I am doing, I'm not making the right decision. And so it's interesting to me that as soon as a person hits this threshold of 65, sometimes it's kind of being pushed up to 75, that when people make a decision that you may not agree with, we now start questioning their cognition and try and steamroll them into doing what we think is right, versus having a conversation and being able to kind of hash it out and see, does the person that I am talking to, if that's a loved one, a client, have the insight to recognize that, there are pros and cons to your decision. These are the risks, and you are accepting of those risks and making a decision that works for you. And I think that is sometimes what can be so challenging about working in geriatrics as a PT, because we tend to come from the safety perspective. We come from the resiliency perspective. We come from, there's so much that you can do. And sometimes that's just not what our clients want. Sometimes our clients do not want a gait aid, even though it will make them safer and it'll make them easier to move around. We can't change that decision. Sometimes we need to acknowledge that our client is not going to put up a rug. Like, they're just not going to, because they've had that in their house for 30 years. They like it there. It's got a lot of memories there. Their grandkids and their kids have played on those rugs and they're not going to move them. They can acknowledge that the way that they're currently doing things are going to increase their risk of falls, but they like doing it that way, and it's their decision to do it that way. And we are only there for 30 to 60 minutes in once or twice a week if we're lucky, and then the other 23 hours and 24 hours on the other days, they're making their decisions on their own. And those types of collaborative conversations are really, really important. Now, I know some of you are probably saying, well, what about issues with cognitive impairment? And that's an entirely different bucket, right? Where individuals are starting to make different decisions, or we're going to have to be doing a little bit more evaluation to recognize what areas of their cognition they are intact within and what areas they are not. And sometimes, if their declarative memory is starting to go, that doesn't mean that their prefrontal cortex or their executive function is gone, and they can still start to make decisions, or at least be part of the decision-making process, and be able to have this collaborative relationship. And so I kind of wanted to finish today's podcast. I know it kind of seemed like this is a bit of a solemn thing, but it's more like this call to arms about what can we do with our clients to allow for more empowerment and more collaboration when it comes to decision making with older adults, especially in regards to safety and falls. And I think the first thing that we always have to remember is who our client is. It can be really easy to be talking to a spouse who is louder, a child who is doing a lot of assistance, and it can be easy to speak to just them. Also, I know some of my home health clinicians are going to really feel this, where sometimes if you're making the decision with your client, you're going to have a caregiver or family member who's going to be very mad at you for making that decision between the two of you and not with them. And that, again, comes back to this advocacy piece around, that decision is the client's decision, and your job as the PT is to serve the client. And that is the older adult that is in front of you. And that can be really challenging sometimes, especially the way that some of the systems and structures are placed. So that's number one. Number two is trying to recognize that many older adults can have this learned hopelessness, that they feel like their decisions in regard to their medical care are no longer their own, that they have had this pre-traumatic stress disorder where these decisions have been slowly taken away from them, and they may actually come to you feeling like they don't have a say. And you may be the first provider that's saying, like, what do you think about this? Or this is kind of what my idea is for how we're going to work together over the next 6 or 8 weeks. Do you agree with this? Is this something that you think is going to work for you? And if the answer is no, let's continue to have a conversation about that. Why do you think that it's not going to work? What would you like to see happen within the next 6 or 8 weeks? And let's work together to figure out a plan of care. Because the second thing about that is that if you have a client who is completely in disagreement with what you're doing, they're probably not going to be very compliant with your exercise program. And so again, it comes into this collaborative care. And that to me is just it's invigorating, because I at least can be a person who can get on my client's level and have these discussions and be on their team. My goal is to be on their team. It is not to take over, come in and charge in and be like, I'm the PT who's going to fix everything. Because when we're working with older adults, sometimes we just can't fix things. Where we want to, and I am the biggest cheerleader, and we want to come in and say, you can have so much potential and you can do so much. But that might not actually be what they want, or it just may not be in the cards if you're, for example, dealing with someone who's in palliative care. This comes back to a book that I have fallen in love with, and I should read it again because I haven't read it for several years now. but it's Atul Gawande's Being Mortal. And he talks particularly about palliative care and the different pathways that people can take when it comes to end of life. And it's a way that he tries to empower us to think that we think in terms of safety metrics, and that's not what our older adults care about. And so how do we spin that in physio care as well and say, we know that there's a lot that we can do, and we're going to be that person who's kind of in the passenger seat trying to guide the person who's in the driver's seat. But we always need to remember that our older adults are in the driver's seat, and they're the ones who are going to navigate and turn left or right based on our recommendations. And if they get lost and they don't go in the direction or end up in the place where we think they should be, or we need to accept that it's not our journey, and we're the guide, we're the coach. And so I just kind of was reflecting on this Wednesday as I've been having more of these conversations with my clients around, just how important these types of reflections are. So I hope that you all have thought about that. I would love to hear your thoughts around your setting too, around these kind of conversations and some of the challenges and struggles and barriers, because I think it's important to acknowledge too that this is not perfect. We are not perfect when it comes to being able to navigate these processes. And if we can talk through barriers, maybe there's another clinician who is listening to this who has worked through it or has figured out a really interesting way to get around it. And so I would love to hear from you all. What do you all think about trying to empower our older adults instead of gradually taking decisions away from them as we get into our golden years? All right, have a wonderful Wednesday. If you guys are interested in jumping into our next online cohort of Modern Management of the Older Adult Essential Foundations, we start April 28th. We are already over halfway full. If you're looking to see us live, I'm going to be in Victor, New York with Jeff Musgrave on the 17th, 18th of April. And I'm going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina the following weekend. So I can't wait to see you all in person, and we will talk to you all soon.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.